Hey third graders, welcome to Module 5, Lesson 22. We are 22/30ths of the way through our fraction unit. Wow, we're getting to the end. All right, so today we're going to generate simple equivalent fractions by using visual fraction models and the number line. So remember, visual means you can look at it, you can make a picture of it. Equivalent, remember, means equal, and we can remember that because it starts with the same first three letters as the word equal. So today we're just making like easy or basic equivalent fractions. Okay, so the first thing that I need you guys to do is get out your fraction kit, and you're going to assemble it to the side of wherever you're working at so that you can use your fraction strips. Go ahead and do that right now. Press pause and press play when you're done. Okay, now that I've got my fractions all lined up, I can use them to find equivalent fractions. What does equivalent mean again? It means equal. Using our strips, we're going to find these equivalent fractions today. So let's go ahead and start with, let's go ahead and start with 2 halves. So let's do this one together. So if I want to know which fractions are equivalent to the fraction 2 halves, I'm going to use my fraction strips to help me. So on your notes, I would like you guys to write this title, equivalent fractions. It's good for you to get this word memorized. And then write 2 halves equals. If you need to press pause and press play, you can. On our chart here, we're going to find our 2 halves, and we're going to try to find out what's equal to 2 halves when we have 2 1/2 pieces put together. So when I'm looking at my little stack of fractions here, I'm looking for anything that lines up with the end of 2 halves. So I see that 3/3 is the same as 2 halves because 1, 2, 3 is the same as 2 halves. I see that my column with 1/4, so if I have 4 1/4, that's the same. 6 6, 8 8, and 12 12, because they're all equal to 1 whole. So now on our notes, what we can do is write those down. So 2 halves equals 3/3, which also equals 4/4, which also equals 6 6, which also equals 8 8, which also equals 12 12. And I think that's all the ones that we have. Okay. So our equal sign here means that this whole row here, as we're looking down, this is equal to this, is equal to this. It just, all of them equal each other. Let's try another one. So this time we're going to look at 2/3. So now we're going to pick up 2 of our 1/3 pieces, and we're going to see which fractions are equivalent to those. So remember, when you're finding an equivalent fraction, it has to be exactly the same. It can't be like a little too short or a little too long. Equivalent means exactly equal. All right, so I see that 2/3 is not equivalent to, here, and I'm going to move this up just a little bit. So I can see that my 2/3 is not equivalent to 1/2. And if I put another half, it's gonna be too big. Okay, so it does not equate to any of my halves. All right, what about my 4ths? So 1/4 is too short. 2/4 is still too short, and 3/4 not equivalent because it's greater than 2/3 put together. It's too long. All right, so 2/3 does not equal any of my 4ths. All right, let's go ahead and try with my next fraction, which is my 6ths. And I'm going to try to keep myself organized here by putting my fractions back where they go. All right, let's go ahead and look at my 6ths. So 1/6, way too short. 2/6, 3/6, 4/6. Ooh, these look equivalent. So if I have 4 1/6 copies, it's the same amount as 2 1/3. Oh, that makes sense, because I remember that 1/3, when I cut it in half, I get 6ths. All right, so let's go ahead and add that to our notes, that 2/3 is equivalent to 4/6. We're not done though. I haven't tried my other fractions. All right, go ahead and try and see if you can put together any eighths to make the same amount as 2/3, and try it with your twelfths. Press pause and press play when you're done. When you guys were doing your thirds, you would have noticed that putting together copies of 1/8 did not equal 2/3, because 3/8 is too small, 4/8 too small, 5/8 too small, 6/8 you go a little bit over. But there were enough twelfths to make an equivalent fraction for 2/3, and that would be 8/12. How did you guys do? So I'm going to add that to my notes. Okay, your next fraction that I want you to find equivalent fractions to is 4/6. Try all of your fractions from your fraction kit to see what equals 4/6. Press pause and press play when you're done. All right, looking at your 4/6, you should have noticed that they were equivalent to, oops, I forgot to put my thirds back, but just like from the last problem, it's also equivalent to 2/3. What? You should have also noticed that it was equivalent to 8/12. So writing this on here, did you guys notice that I gave you the same exact problem? So 4/6 equals 2/3 equals 8/12. And if you had noticed here, we had them in the same list. So even though we started with different fractions, they were still equivalent. What do you notice about the relationship between 2/3 and 4/6? What do you notice about what's happening here with the numbers in the numerator and the denominator? Yeah, they're being doubled. So doubled, remember, so the word doubled equals times by 2. So it means that you have 2 of the same thing. So if I have 2 2s, that equals 4, and 2 3s equals 6. So when I doubled that, I got an equivalent fraction. That makes sense because a third, when it's cut in half, makes 2/6. And then when I doubled my 4, I got 8. And if I double my 6, I get 2. I'm sorry, if I get 6 times 2, I get 12. And that makes sense because if you cut a 1/6 in half, you get a 12. So we're multiplying it by 2 because a 6 in half is a 12th. So it's like you're just increasing the amount of pieces that you have by 2. Did the whole change when we were finding equivalent fractions? No, it didn't at all. It stayed the same. So our whole here stayed the same no matter which fraction that we are talking about. And when we were talking about a certain fraction, like a third or 2/6, the amount stayed the same for our unit fraction. It was just that we needed more pieces of the smaller unit fractions to make the bigger piece, and we had to find the right ones to make the equivalent fractions. Okay, let's say that you don't have your fraction kit with you and Miss Pfeiffer asks you, what are some equivalent fractions to 1/3? So you can draw yourself a visual model. So on your notes, we're gonna draw 1/3 and we're gonna use a rectangle. So draw your rectangle and we're gonna divide it in thirds, and I'd like you guys to divide it in thirds this way, our little French fry way. That's what we call it in class. Okay, then we're gonna shade in 1/3, and I'd like you to shade in this first 1/3 here. Okay, so now if you're gonna use a visual model to help you find equivalent fractions, I'd like you to draw the same rectangle again. So remember, when we're comparing fractions, we're going to try to make our whole as close to the same as we can, because the wholes have to be equal or else we can't use them to compare our fractions. All right, so we're gonna divide it into thirds again, but now we get to cut a little bit more. So we're still gonna shade in this part here and make it like our thirds, but this time let's cut it across the middle. We still have the same amount shaded because, you know, we did that. We started with this one here and we just cut it again. But this time our unit fraction is different. What is it this time? Yeah, it's 2/6. So already I've found out that 1/3 is equivalent to 2/6. Let's see if we can do one more rectangle here. And I'm going to cut it into thirds again. But is there a different way that we can cut it this time? Let's cut it in thirds going the opposite direction. So we'll make some horizontal lines here to make thirds. So I still have the same amount shaded in. I've started with the same hole, but it's like I've just cut my cake into more pieces. And so my pieces become smaller, even though I have the same amount shaded in. So 2/6 equals 3/9. So 3/9 is the same as 2/6 and 1/3. We're gonna practice more of those visual models tomorrow in class, but for today, I'd just like you to show me equivalent fractions for 3/4, and you can use your fraction kit for this one. So you can get out 3 copies of your 1/4 pieces and see which other fractions are equivalent to that. Remember, stay organized. Just go from top to bottom on your fractions. So like try your halves, then your thirds, then your sixths, and just go down the list so you don't accidentally skip one. All right, write those equivalent fractions down, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Have a great night.